And I'm going to start by introducing Judy Apps. And so Judy, if you want to just give a wave in case they hadn't noticed that you're there. Yep. I first met Judy when she started doing Aikido at Piers' club, and always liked practicing with her. And I learned that she was trained in neuro-linguistic programming and coached and trained in that, and was curious enough to go and send myself on a course with her, and really loved it. She was really good at it. And what was wonderful is I had an inkling it might be linked to Aikido, and I found myself thinking at the end of the course, this is just Aikido. It's just about Aikido and relationships, really. And it actually gave me quite a lot of insight to come back to the mat and use what I learned on the course. And I've just always since followed Judy's work in the written form, really. And she writes a brilliant blog. I always find it insightful and useful. And she's written quite a few books. I'm holding one up now. You can check out others on her website. This one's called The Art of Communication, hence tonight's topic. I don't read many books. I just don't, especially not academic books or sort of self-help books. But I read through this, it's an easy read. And I kept finding little phrases. I thought, that's just Aikido. That's just Aikido. That's just Aikido. And although Judy's influenced by Aikido, I would have to say that, you know, it's the NLP that came first and the Aikido second. So it was a bit like me coming to NLP and saying it's the secondary thing rather than the first thing. So that's one of my starting point, Judy. What was it about Aikido that drew you in, and what made you stay for as long as you did? Because you didn't exactly start as a flush of youth.
Actually, it came from not exactly the Aikido, but that was the delight of it. The delight of it was with NLP and Aikido. But I started because I trained and coached in voice. I was an opera singer at one time. I trained in voice and presentation skills. And I was once at some conference and I was actually doing some research on charisma. And I asked somebody, you know, what do you think about presence? How does one really get presence? And she just came up with Aikido. And thinking back now, I think that was a bit of a left field kind of suggestion, actually. But I found Piers up at Cold Hub and started Aikido. And a huge thing about that as regards anything to do with communication, whether you're talking to a big audience or one-to-one, is there are other people involved.
Yes.
And actually, I think a lot of people thinking about public speaking, think about how am I going to be? But actually, Aikido, you're facing somebody, and not always the most sort of friendly looking person that's coming at you. So
I have to say that don't you think it bizarre that you got this left field suggestion, and the dojo was literally next door to your house?
Yeah. Yes.
Very bizarre.
That's absolutely true. So I did what you did with the NLP. I did the other way, and you know, everything that Piers in his wisdom said up there at Cold Harbour, I thought, oh God, yes, yeah, I tune in with that. I tune in with that. Why did I stick at it so long? Well, it's very clever that Aikido has these little goals that you have to, you know, you get one coloured belt and then you get another, and I think it was sheer bloody mindlessness, really. I kind of had to get the next stage and the next stage. Although I wouldn't recommend starting Aikido in your 50s and really, really mastering those forward rolls elegantly and beautifully and softly. But yeah, that's how it was.
So I found that NLP helped deepen my knowledge of Aikido, or knowledge of life, really. What did you find in Aikido that chimed in with your NLP? I mean, you do give quite a few nods to it in your book.
I think that I'd be interested to know from everybody, actually, you know, why you started Aikido, any of you. But I think for most people, okay, it might be about confidence and feeling strong, but for most people, it's a physical thing that they go to Aikido for, maybe. Contradict me, everybody.
Feel free to carry on.
so there's that physical bit. And then they discover more and more how important, how it's a mind thing. So I discovered that, and working with people on voice, I was discovering so many people in companies who just think that anything to do with talking is neck upwards, really. You know, particularly those very bright people I'd work with. You know, here's my great brain up here, which is having these amazing thoughts, and all I have to do is breathe in through my nose and spout out of my mouth. And I would work with some people who, I don't know, wanted to be a partner in their firm, and they talk like this, you know, they talked absolutely like this because they were very clever, very intelligent people. And what I got from Aikido that was confirmation for me was everything to do with communication involves your body. You might start in the recesses of your mind, but you express it through your body.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to say no to somebody, if you say, no, I can't do it, no, you know, it's not the same as saying, no, even without the gesture. No comes from your body. And a lot of things come from your body. When you ask somebody how they are, they say, I'm fine, absolutely fine, no, I'm fine. And you know they're lying, because actually what they want to say is, if they dare to go into the body, they would just say, actually, I'm really not fine. You know, it would come from the body. So it was that to start with, this whole idea of the two coming together. And of course, I got the presence. I mean, you know, Aikido is full of presence.
Yeah.
You know, that state of readiness.
Yeah.
Is just so brilliant. I remember at the time somebody came up with a story in NLP. It was actually a proper bit of research that was done on the London Underground, and a lot of people, I mean, obviously well before COVID, a lot of people get attacked on the Underground, and particularly people working there. You know, and the people who'd regularly been attacked, and then there were people who somehow had never been attacked. So they thought they'd do this study on, you know, who gets attacked and who not. And actually what they discovered, it wasn't the ones, you know, stand like a big policeman who were almost asked to be, you know, attacked because they're saying, okay, come and get me if you dare. It was the people who stood there really calmly, but there was something about them that kind of said, you know, it wouldn't be a good idea to mess with me. But that was sort of invisible. It was just in the balance of the body that wasn't floppy, wasn't it was just that beautiful sense. And I thought that was magic in Aikido. I thought it was amazing. I mean, I think even to I won't keep on going on, but even to my black belt, I think I was still kind of, you know, out of fear from what was going to come. But, you know, the people who do it beautifully, I mean, it's the most beautiful art, isn't it?
Yeah.
Aikido.
Just... Yeah, but even if you didn't feel like you completely mastered it on the mat, I imagine that in your own realm, it gave you even greater confidence and a slightly more depth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I use it in examples as well with people all the time when we're talking about communication, and perhaps we'll say something about that a bit later. But yes, that whole idea of how you hold yourself. Yeah. Because one of the things that I was always very impressed by is if you do a study of people who communicate really well. So let's think about, you know, the public speakers or people in the public realm. The people who do it really well, they don't come out of the same box at all. They're all completely different, and some are a bit more, they've got a more lively energy, and some have a very, very peaceful energy. But they've all got that sense of being okay in their bodies, their ease with themselves. So it's about coming into yourself, and then actually you're most powerful. The funny thing is, you probably think you're most vulnerable because you is showing, but actually you're most powerful. We often used to use that the comparison with what's his name, Errol Flynn. I'm sure you've talked about him. You know how he used to hold a bird in his films. He always used to say, if you hold it too tight, you crush the bird and it dies. If you hold it too loose, it gets away. So it's all about not too tight and not too loose.
I have to
And
say,
that was something that I got much more strongly from Aikido.
I have to tell you, it's the first time that Errol Flynn's ever come into these conversations, but I'm glad you've introduced him.
Well, there you are. It's his bird. Swashbuckling Errol Flynn. How to hold a sword, he said. Yes.
So the word that
Hold
comes,
it like a bird. I think it's nice. I like the image.
the word that comes to mind from what you're saying is authenticity. How would you define authenticity?
It's an evil. It's a difficult word. It's a really difficult word, authenticity. My mum always used to say to myself, just be yourself. And you'd think, heck, the myself at the moment is a shaking, fearful blob. Kind of, how can I be myself? So it is a matter of coming into the inside you. There's another image, which is a lot of people present, a lot of politicians do this. I mean, I'm not even talking about the lying ones. I'm talking about, politicians and public personalities often have a very shiny exterior. So they're kind of on the ball and they're there and they're kind of confident but it is like a shine. It's a gloss.
Yes.
And you know that you're not really getting the real person. You're getting the performance personality.
Yes.
And most people don't want to go underneath that. They can often, in presenting, people can manage to do that. They can learn to do that. And they have to keep it up because they know that inside them is this shaky bit that sort of says to them, when they're at their most important moment, says to them, do you remember when you were 4, Mrs. McDermott said you were no good at this sort of thing, all that sort of stuff inside, which is the layer inside. But authenticity is, I've suddenly thought of a connection actually, is that shining light inside you. I suddenly thought of the Dantian, you're kind of a light, something incredibly powerful, but it's not hard. It's pulsating.
What sprang to me was it's kind of mind, body, and if you want spirit, all in alignment.
It could be that. And the only way you get to that authenticity in my model that I'm demonstrating to you now is if you let that gloss go, or if you allow a bit of vulnerability because you've got this blobby bit inside which is a bit scared. But you can't ever get to that beautiful core, the spirit, if you like, unless you give way a bit, which is relaxing until you let go of it, if you like.
And that's where that's when we're at our most powerful, when we're able to sort of get in touch with that. And I would say that's exactly true on the mat too, when we're able to be aligned, when we're physically and emotionally and spiritually and all those good things, when we're able to find that version of ourselves, that's when we deal well with situations.
Exactly. It's one of those things that's lovely to watch on the mat. If you're a big group of a mixed group from different clubs and so on, that you see that people are going at it and are going to, in their mind, they're going to win. In other words, the person's going to fall. And then the people who are a bit fearful, and then the people who flow with it, and they've got much more strength, of course, haven't they? They've got much more.
So what are the key rules for you in terms of good communication then?
Well, you don't ask easy questions, do you? I thought you meant to ask.
Well, you've written a book on it, so I thought you might have a clue.
All right.
What would be your ABC? Where would you start?
Okay, so communication is connection.
Yes.
We get a lot of, I need to get my message across. The message is what the other person gets. You might think you start with something, but actually the message was whatever somebody else gets. So you're only really going to communicate with somebody if you connect in some way with them. And you do it in exactly the same way in verbal communication or communication with people as you do in Aikido. And that is you meet. And you meet when in some way you're equal. So in Aikido, when you've got a beginner, you go to whatever you're meeting.
Yes.
All right. You don't become a beginner, but you meet at the same level of energy, if you like. Well, it's exactly the same. You meet with a similar level of energy. And the way, if you want to take one thing away from this about verbal communication, it is that we fail when we don't do that. Yeah. So, for example, the person who always has to be a little bit the teacher, I want to be with you, of course I want to be, but I want to stay as the person, I want to be the adult in this room. And it always comes across and you lose that connection. Now, it doesn't mean you become like a child. Yeah. It's energy. So when you're talking, not in Aikido particularly, but when you're talking communication, verbal communication, you talk about energy, whereas often people want to talk about mood.
Sure.
So let's say you meet an angry person. Now, what I'm saying with my theory is you meet them in their energy, but you don't meet them in anger. Let's say, for example, somebody comes at you and points their finger. So what the hell are you going to do about this? Now, the received wisdom is you say, well, let's just calm down, shall we? Now, if you've ever been angry yourself and you've got somebody saying, let's calm down, shall we? It makes you furious. It makes you really cross. Stop telling me to calm down. What I'm saying is, but the Aikido method is you meet that energy. Now, you don't stay at that energy, just as in Aikido, you don't stay with however you meet, because in Aikido, we have a leading. After you've met, you lead. So also in verbal communication, what the hell are you going to do about this? Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. And I think it's a really important thing to tell you. What I think really would be a good idea at this point is, and I've changed my energy by the end. Now, if you've changed your energy for whatever it was, however quickly you did it, if you met them for a second there, once you've changed your energy, it's very hard for them to go back to this. So you enter a new space, a new energetic space.
Yeah. Can I just pick you up on something? You several times you said verbal communication, but I think you mean communication in that wider sense, because you've made it really clear that unless there's that alignment between your words and your tone of voice and the use of the body generally, you don't get great connection and you don't get great communication.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to think of a way to say what I'm talking about. So what would you call it? Communication. Okay, so we've got Aikido and we've got communication.
Just in your opinion then, so how much of communication do you think is through the body and how much do you think is through the words we use? I mean, there have been studies and I think they say up to 85% is sort of non-verbal, but just what's your feeling on that?
I've had the figures. 55%, is body language, etc. They did some rather poor studies actually. A guy called Mehrabian did some studies that were taken on a very few people and they were acting their thing. I couldn't say definitely, but everything is your communication. So silence is communication. Sometimes with somebody, you can be perhaps driving in a car and you get a quality of silence that there's communication between you. There's something beautiful that happens. It's suddenly peaceful, which is very different from the silence. So you're both holding yourselves back and thinking, I won't speak now, all right? So everything is there. And as you know from Aikido, your stillness is as expressive. The fact that you catch what somebody's going to do even before they've moved. Yeah. Just like the amazing tennis player, the person hasn't even got anywhere near hitting the ball before they know exactly. So that's there all the time in communication if you're awake to it. Yeah. Tone of voice is, well, of course, that's my field, but it's amazingly important. And it's amazing.
They worry that if
I don't worry, carry on.
It's amazing how many people just don't consider that. There are a lot of people who have a tone of voice. So they have the tone of voice and they say, it was a great date yesterday, absolutely fantastic, best day of my life, in fact. And then they say, actually, last week I had this complete disaster. It was absolutely amazingly awful. I almost died. And it's the same old voice for everything. So your voice is incredibly important. you know, somebody would say, well, I told him I didn't mind. I really told him I didn't mind. And, you know, courts of law go on the words, don't they? You know, yeah. Twitterscape goes on the words. But actually, it's how you say it that matters.
So you reminded me of another thing just through that, really, that when people use that sort of tone and they're using those sorts of words, they're kind of denying themselves, and they're not really being honest with themselves about how they really feel. And I think that's one of the crucial things about Aikido, that if you're to progress, you've got to look pretty closely at yourself and be honest with yourself and accept where you're really at rather than where you think you should be at or want to be at.
Yeah, because a lot of the worst things in communication happen when you're trying very hard to be in a particular way. You notice the words, trying very hard to be. So, for example, I'm really trying to be nice and kind to somebody who I've been hurt by, say, and I speak in this nice, kind way, and they accuse me of being patronizing. Now, I'm not actually being patronizing, but actually my voice sounds patronizing because I'm not being genuine. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we think it's very easy to be genuine. I mean, none of us are genuine all the time. I think a lot of us are not genuine a lot of the time, and for very good reasons. You know, we want to be there for people, we want to help people, we want to, you know, I noticed very early on, you know, taking Aikido into training courses, how every time I greeted somebody, I kind of made an effort. So somebody would come in and I'd say, oh, hello. And my shoulders would go up and I'd go, oh, really nice to see you. And I thought, I wonder what it would be like if I just stayed in me to say hello. I found it really hard to do because there was that, oh, I've got to be there for that person. So I think, you know, in different ways, there are also the non-reactors, you know, the people who don't react to anything, which is the opposite of me. And, you know, equally, they don't react to things that, looking from outside, you'd think, but that deserved a reaction, you know, and they don't, you know, oh, thank you very much. You know, I've just changed that person's life. Well, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, they're exhibiting a level of control there, aren't they? Self-control, which, again, is just a way of masking who they really are and what they're really feeling.
Yes, I mean, you know, you've been at my latest book, the communication one, and control is huge. Control is huge in our time, probably always was there, but it's huge because we want certainty, we want to be sure, we want to know, you know, somebody will come and they want sort of help with a conference speech or something. They want to know what's going to be in it and exactly what they're going to say, and people get scared of perhaps somebody interrupting. Or now Aikido is brilliant for that because you don't know what you're going to get. So Aikido is brilliant for the art of spontaneity. Yeah. Now you've got loads to learn, and communication, there is actually loads to learn. When I started talking in communication about the to and fro of conversation with a stranger, I got a lot of feedback that it was amazing and exciting, and it was so basic. You know, that the way to talk to a stranger is you give a little something back and you leave a little hook so they could ask an easy question if they wanted to. And, you know, very obvious things that because we learn language so early, we never learn the art of some of those things, like you learn the art in Aikido. So you've got the art and practice of it, which is about control, but actually this whole substance is spontaneity, isn't it? Hugely.
Do you ever get frustrated? I mean, because you obviously would probably have a high level of reading people's bodies and noticing their tone, etc., etc. So you kind of know when they're being authentic or not. And do you find yourself getting very frustrated because you can see all the time or very often how people are just not being themselves with you?
I guess if I were a bit more perfect, I would, because I know myself. You know, I've got lots of acts and half acts and quarter acts that I put on. The people that annoy me are the people that deceive everybody all the time and therefore take advantage of them. Yeah, that annoys me a lot.
Yeah.
People you see often in public life, and you can absolutely see that
Yes.
it's complete act, no authenticity whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that does annoy me. Interesting thing with the voice of these people, actually, people who are putting on an act, they put on the voice as well. And there's some little tells. You can tell when somebody's putting on a voice. They start it with there's a well-known person, if you ask them how they are, and they kind of, that answer should be sort of, well, yes, but they go, well, as a matter of fact, and it comes out, and there's always a tiny little tell when somebody's putting on the act. So I'm curious about all those, but yeah, of course there are people who annoy me.
Yeah. So one of the things that most interested me about your book was sort of the left brain, right brain conundrum and the part they play in communication, because it really chimed a bell with me in Aikido too. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So the idea of left brain, right brain's been around for a long time. I think many people might think, well, it almost died, this whole idea of the artistry in the right brain and the rationality in the left. But there's been a lot of work done on it now, as you will know, but we know much more now about what's lighting up in the brain. We know it's not just one little bit, oh, hello, I'm language. We know that it's all diffused, but even with that, there's a real left brain, right brain thing about it. And I got a lot of inspiration myself from a book which was based on huge research, but actually was a layman's book, because it was somebody who had various degrees in different things. And his name is Ian McGilchrist. And he wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary. And his idea was that the master should, in a world that will work beautifully, be the right brain, but actually is the left rational brain. So we're going more and more towards the left rational brain. You'll find if you work in business, if you work anywhere, people want more proof of exactly what's happening. They want all the psychometrics. They want everything to be absolutely sure that they know they've got who they think they've got, and so on. Ian McGilchrist gives this lovely image of left and right brain, which absolutely makes sense to me. He says, you've got this bird, and the bird needs to find seed. So it is looking at all these pebbles, and it's searching for seeds, and it gets seed, right? That's the left brain. It's dealing with something that is known already. I've got these pebbles, right? And I think I'm going to find seed there, and I spot seed. That is a left brain activity. The right brain activity in that same bird is its awareness. It's awareness that there might be a predator, there might be things going on. It's got this amazing awareness as well. And that is the right brain. Now, the right brain is always given a bad press because the right brain is never certain. Because the right brain knows that things are big and complicated enough and enough exceptions, etc., that we can never be absolutely sure. So, all the great scientists, from Einstein on, they all talk about, but we never know. We never know for sure. This is what we know up till now. The poor old scientists in the pandemic, what they want to say is this is what we know up till now. And one will say, well, I think we know this as well. And the other one will say, well, I think we know this as well. And then we follow the science, the madness of this according to the right brain. Mad, because we're just gathering information. The left brain really, really wants certainty. It wants to know what is there. So it constantly wants everything to be tables and lists and models. It deals enormously with models. And you will get this in the law, and you get this in politics, because they have to make decisions. I mean, you can't have a right brain saying, well, we can't really make a decision, can we? Because we can't be sure. People who work in decision making have to work with models, but the right brain knows that that's full of flaws. It knows it's full of flaws, and knows there's a reason for doing a model. There's a reason for working in this way with the world.
You give a really nice example in the book about hierarchy and the Korean pilot. Do you want to quickly tell that?
Yes, I can't remember the names anymore, but yes, in Korea, there's huge respect for your elders. I mean, in the Eastern world in general, there is huge respect for your elders. So the co-pilot was much younger than the pilot, and he could see that the pilot was making a mistake, and that they were flying too low and it was getting very dangerous. And he wanted to find a way of saying, look, this is getting really dangerous. But he was so much in that model of you have to respect your elders, you don't speak up unless spoken to, that you can hear him sort of try a tentative something, but he's not listened to. So he goes to his death. They crash into the mountain because he couldn't actually speak up. And that's very much, when things are four square and you've got your hierarchies in business, we still work enormously with hierarchies. People know where they are in the pecking order. Yeah. You might even say that, this is political, I shouldn't say this. We like having toffs in charge of us because that's the natural order of things. It always has been in this great country. Since we were feudal, we have kings and queens, and so if you're very used to particular ways of doing things, it's hard to shift. And the right brain says, no, everything is spontaneous. Everything is an example of one. So when you meet somebody in communication, the left brain might say, okay, I can see what they're wearing, I can see how they're standing, I can see their accent, I'm getting a measure of them already. The right brain stays open to getting more and more information. And for the left brain, that is a very uneasy place to be. And for many people, it's a very uneasy place to be. Some people cannot stand not knowing. I write a lot in my books about not knowing because, if you're coaching people, if you're working with people, that place of not knowing, that wonderful Aikido, being there, listening, being open to what's coming in, open much longer before you close down and say, no, it's this sort of person. I know how to deal with this sort of person because they're this sort of person.
Yeah, well, that's another great link to Aikido, isn't it? So when you think it's going to be this attack, yes, and it turns out to be something else, that's when you die. But when you're kind of open to possibility, you have this empty mind, mushin, as it's described. Yeah. Then you just react in the moment and you tend to come up with a more appropriate solution.
Yes, and it's that openness. That's the magic thing with Aikido. It's an openness which is not fearful. It's empty is such a good word. And yet, talking, people would say, oh, for goodness sake, that sounds a bit pathetic. I don't want to be empty, thank you very much. I want to be full of courage. But yeah, that's it. A place of acceptance, and because then you notice even before you notice. You pick up the vibes even before they've happened. You're relaxed, so you're in yourself. The other side of this is, how much are you in yourself, how much are you in the other person? Because that's very important for communication. Yes. When I was talking about connection before. Brings
us back to connection. There's kind of a unity then in good communication.
There's a what?
Kind of unity.
Yes. It's marrying those two things, which is I stay in my own skin, right? But I step into the other person's shoes as well. Now, most of us do one of those a little bit more than the other. Right. So some of us are a bit more assertively on ourselves and don't quite notice exactly what's going on with the other person, right? But other people are so much in the other person. They're aware of, how it's going, how something's going down, how it's happening, how it's hitting the other person. And they're the people who cannot ever say, well, I believe this. They'll say, well, I think probably it's, it's like this. And they're constantly sort of looking at the other person's eyes and seeing if they're going to be with them or not, because otherwise they don't feel they can say, well, according to me, rats do rule the world, kind of. without seeing the other person's thing. So there's those two. And then there is a third one, really, which is there's something in Aikido that stands outside and sees the whole thing. I think there is something that is not either me, being authentically me, or the other person. It's a broader awareness. And in communication, we often call that the observer. Or I suppose if you were into the sort of spiritual, you'd call it the witness, the witness that knows I'm breathing. There's that as well, which can be hugely, hugely informative. So, that sometimes I think in Aikido is the sort of letting go in a way, the heaviness, the kind of relaxation, which is a letting go.
You haven't used the intuition word yet, and that seems to me to form an important part of good communication too, that knowing when to press if necessary or when to back off, and not necessarily from the words that are used, but just from a feeling that you're getting that that extra question might be the solution, or actually giving that person the space might be the solution.
Yes, so that's the right brain quality. It's hugely there for the right brain. This intuition. So, the right brain that loves art and music and all those things, and has a deep sense of intuition.
Cultivate it.
Sorry?
How do you cultivate intuition?
Well, you do 17 years of Aikido to start with. And then many people don't trust their intuition.
Yeah.
I think intuition is hugely about noticing. So you would have done in our NLP course, we started with noticing. So we did this little exercise where somebody just thinks about somebody they absolutely love without trying to make an expression. They just think about that person. And then they think about somebody that they really have difficulty with, or they hate, or they don't like. And then the other people in the group ask questions, and they say, for example, okay, I want you to think of the one that's taller. And you don't know who they're thinking about, all right? And you watch the person, and they just think about, whichever of those two was the taller. And you start to realize that the face, even in repose, is hugely expressive. I mean, for example, what is the difference between a glittering eye and a shining eye? Nothing minute. You've still got the sort of reflection, but a glittering eye is very different from a shining eye. You notice the breathing is hugely important. If you want to sort of use your intuition on people, be aware of their breathing. The breathing changes enormously as they flow from one half mood into another. It's hugely. So you begin to watch, you begin to realize that actually the face color does get paler when they think of one person and then the other. A tiny change to the amount of blood under the skin, let alone that, tiny little twitches of the mouth, even when they're not, they've been asked not to express anything particularly, just to think about the person. So I think that's a good way to start using your intuition. And then with a lot of the skills that I learned to do with meeting people equally, you realize that a lot of the things we do are not helpful. I had an example. I think I was reading it in a book the other day. There was this boy, it was a film. I was watching a film, and there was this boy, and his mother had died, and he had been told by his dad, when his dad died, he said, look after your mother, and he was about 7, look after your mother. And his mother died, and he was distraught. I know which film it was called Dig. It was about the Sutton Hoo. And he said, I've failed, I've completely failed. Now, my instinct, which is not my intuition, would say, of course you haven't, you really did your best, right? But this wise old guy who did the first bit of Sutton Hoo Dig said to him, yeah, we all fail. We all fail. So he met him. He met him exactly where it was. And to me, that wouldn't have been an intuitive thing to say, actually. But, you know, a while ago, I wouldn't have thought of that. I'd have thought, I've got to reassure them. But reassurance, if somebody's blur, they want to be met, not blur, but there. They want to be met there. So if somebody's saying, oh God, I'm feeling like death, it is not helpful to say, come on, the sun's shining, come on, cheer up. Blur. You are so different. So you meet in a place that is similar. And sometimes if the person is very quiet, then you've got to leave space. You know, in coaching, you know, I do more coaching than anything else these days. You know, in coaching, when your client goes quiet, that is not the time to talk. They're doing some sort of inner processing. Just wait. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, something really interesting happens at that very point. The point you were able to stay quiet. So every time you can sort of meet them where they're at. I mean, it works the other way around. You know, your friend has suddenly come into a load of money, and the authentic part of you, if I may use your word, the authentic part of you thinks, always happens to other people, never happens to me. I wish that'd be really nice if it happened to me for once. But because it's a friend of yours and you want to meet them, you whiz your energy up as a meeting. Oh, that's fantastic. My gosh, you must be excited about that. Right? Now, you would say that wasn't authentic, but it's a meeting.
Yeah.
You want to meet them. It's your volition to meet them. So if your instinct, if your intuition is to go for that, you find you're coming out with things so much wiser, actually.
Well, you've brought in 3 things again that I think are related to Aikido. One is that you have to meet them at the point that they're at. If you go too far in or you hold back too far in Aikido, it just doesn't work. You have to meet them at the exact place to get beautiful technique working. You talked about breath and the importance of that.
Oh, yeah.
And you also talked about sort of, well, you didn't say the word mindfulness, but this attention to detail and noticing the small stuff, because the small stuff is important, which I think is also really huge in Aikido, especially as you after you've sort of mastered those early years, it becomes all about the detail.
Yeah, actually, you're making me think that all these things are full of paradox. Because of course it is more and more about the detail, as well as it's more and more about the bigger picture. So you've got those 2 things which are kind of opposites, and you're doing them at the same time. At the same time, you've got complete relaxation and huge energy. Again, I mean, people often say, don't they, well, you know, when you reach nirvana or whatever, it's absolutely that. You know, when you practice mindfulness, you relax completely, but you don't slump. You stay brilliantly awake. And I think that is the magic of all these things, is that you do things that seem contradictory. And that is completely right brain. You actually can take opposites. You can live with opposites side by side. And actually they are the answer to everything, you know, that you do both. You do both at the same time. And the rational mind would say, well, of course you can't do that. Can't do that. You know, either a detail person or your big picture person. I'm a big picture person myself. I just say, just give me one sentence. I don't want to see. I don't want to see all those NHS figures. Thank you very much. Sorry.
No, that would be me as well. I'd be a big picture person. I thought the future, I just want to come up with, I don't highlight books. I don't like marking books. I think it's sort of sacrilegious, but I did a lot of highlighting in this one. I found it really helpful. And I want to just pick out 1 or 2 phrases that really chimed again with me.
Okay.
You've got a chapter which it starts, it's all love. I thought, well, yes, you did. And that struck me as actually, when you listen to O-Sensei, that's what he said about Aikido, isn't really all about love. So you want to talk about that a little bit for you?
Yes. Yeah, it is. Communication is about caring for people. I've had 1 or 2 aha moments in my life. And one was when I was doing a course of NLP as a learner. And it was a big course, about 150 people, and you had to get into pairs to do stuff. And we had to get into pairs to do something which was going to be a long exercise, taking a big chunk of the morning. And on just that very occasion, I somehow just didn't find a pair. And we had to put our hands up if you hadn't got a pair. And I looked across the room. We'd been doing this course over months. And the person I saw who hadn't got a pair was this guy that I kind of, at a distance, I really so disliked. I just disliked. He was up himself. He was arrogant. Really, really disliked this guy. But anyway, we had to go off, and actually we went out into a park to do this very long exercise. And then I discovered stuff about him. And I discovered he came from this is a while ago. So he came from a Jewish heritage. His, parents and grandparents had been involved in the middle of Europe, all these things he'd had to escape as a child, all sorts of very, very difficult stuff he'd been faced with. And then, he lost both parents in the end in the Holocaust. It just went on, and I began to warm towards him. And I thought, my goodness, if I'd been, that. And then I began to notice all that was amazing about him. Just bit by bit, I thought, my gosh, you've got courage, and etc. And I began to warm enormously towards him. And I've had a few ahas like that make me just ready, a bit more ready, I think, for anything you meet. So when you're networking, for example, there's a lot that's talked about in business of how to network. And somebody was very good at it. I asked her how she did it, hoping for some really, solid stuff about it. And she said, well, I just sort of enter the room and I just get an intuition, and I just walk up to somebody, which at the time for me was really not helpful. But what I did discover, trying to do that a bit, is that there are the people who are always trying to sell as they talk to you. But the people who network well are really happy for it to go either way. They really hope that they'll be able to give you something amazing, and they're really happy too if you've got something to give them. So you meet at a place where you're just happy for whatever comes out of it. And the aha for me with this was that, at a time when a guy started talking and I thought, okay, this is definitely going to be a giving session, because I went into it that way. I came away, after 5 or 10 minutes of talking, realized I got a lot from this guy. So I'd gone into it after the first few seconds thinking, well, okay, I'm very happy to give, and I'd got a lot from it. So I think this sort of, you could call it open-mindedness, you could call it, caring for people, but I think actually, yeah, it's love. I mean, just another very, very quick story, but I really liked it. I was told this in a course. There was a rugby guy, and they were interviewing him with some other people about, how they got the best out of their squad. And the other two people were very articulate. They said, well, we do this and we do that. And then they interviewed this rugby guy, and he just didn't have the words, and he was struggling, and eventually just slammed his arm and said, oh, bugger, he said, I just love the buggers. Kind of. And I thought, yeah, that's right. They care. It's about caring. So you can call it care, but I like the word love. I think that's right. That's right. It is love. We get very hung up about love in this country because we've only got the word love. What are there? About 5 Greek words, aren't there? We've only got love. So you love your cat, you love your computer, and you love your partner, and it's all the same old word, but I think it is the same thing. It's caring about them. Yeah,
you put positive out, you get positive back, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So in Aikido, you get out what you get back. So when you go in a bit too heavy, which sometimes happens at when clubs meet each other, and people sort of feel there's a bit of street cred they've got to sort of uphold, they go in too heavy. Well, going in too heavy means they go in a bit too tight, so they get tightness back. So so yes, you get in. When you go in with flow, Yes, you draw it out of the other person. That's absolutely true. Yes.
Almost the very final paragraph of your book, it reads as follows. These are your words. The long future for ourselves, our families, communities, business, and the planet itself depends on connectivity across the globe, including your moment-to-moment connections here in the palm of our hands. Well, if that doesn't resonate to you Aikido folks, I don't know what should. So it just sounded pure Aikido to me.
That's good.
You said that. It's good, isn't it?
Well, it is good because I gave a TED talk, a TEDx talk, in 2019, which was, a year or so after that. It was almost that. It was almost that. How interesting that I was thinking that yet. Yes, yeah. Communication is hugely, hugely important. And I read in a book, and I quoted that as well, a book by Ali Smith, lovely novelist. She said, all we do these days is talk at each other, but there's no dialogue. Dialogue is always a to and fro. Have you ever had this happen? It's a friend of mine used to laugh about it. People come to dinner and they talk all night about their holiday and what went wrong with their holiday. The whole evening they've talked about their holiday and then a little bit about their children. And when they're gone, you thought, okay, well, they didn't ask one single question about us. And then they would thank you afterwards. They said, it was such a fantastic evening. We had such great conversations. And they would actually say that, the conversation was so amazing because, of course, they were involved. But conversation is always has a feeling of equality, unless you make a contract. Unless you make a contract, this is my counselling session, and I'm there to listen. But yeah. And yes, and the little is as important as the large. I think that is true. I think if ever we're going to change things, it does start with one conversation after another conversation, so that people learn that that's how it works. And it is absolutely true when we're not getting many conversations at the moment. We haven't got many public spaces for dialogue. Mm-hmm. We got to a stage a long time ago where sort of party conferences became displays because the media was so powerful that, if ever there were quarrels, the media picked them up. So they became displays. And a lot of the meeting now is kind of display. And what we need is dialogue, people saying what's actually true for them. And even in the workplace, there's enough fear for people to find it very difficult to have real dialogue. Although I think if you communicate well, there are ways to give bad news well. I mean, I think there are ways to say your truth by finding something. I worked with a county councillor who was passionate about the young people in her borough, passionate about them. And she was having a bit of coaching because she felt she just wasn't getting anywhere. She just wasn't getting in the council or in the committee meetings, just wasn't getting anywhere. And I sort of said to her, well, what do they care most about? Because they wouldn't listen to her. They said, oh, it's always the bottom line. It's always the bottom line, the bottom line. I said, well, start there. So she did. I mean, this is just, obviously a story that ended well. But she went in and she did. She said, this is not going to work and that's not going to work and it's going to cost us this and it's going to cost us that. She started there. She got their attention. And then she was able to say a little bit about how, how our kids, how our children matter. Yeah. And she felt she got through. So you start with
meet them where they're at.
Where they're at. And it could be the subject matter, all right, which is the easiest one. So if you're talking to a stranger, start with the weather, start with safe stuff. It could be stuff, what's happening in the world, etc., or safe. And then you go on to activities, because then you're talking about the other person, because it's what they do. So it is about them, but it's safe. I play golf, or I do this, Then you go into, what they think about those things. So then you're getting a little bit closer to the person. Do you enjoy golf? What is you like about golf? I don't know why I'm saying golf, because I don't play it. All right. And then after that, this is where connection actually happens. You ask them, So why does that matter to you? Or what's important about that? Or why do you love it? A gentle why question. And then people's values come out.
Mm.
Then you get what matters to them. Then you're meeting them. Then you're really meeting them. Now, you don't do that in 4 sentences, but you do that. And in terms of the person, you're starting on the outside and you're getting closer and closer to the heart, the gut, the spirit, and you can go really, really deep. If you happen to hit it off with a stranger, you might have found that occasionally you've told a stranger stuff you wouldn't have told the person closest to you in the world. It just, you hit it off. You met, and you met eventually on, you felt what their values were. You felt, this is my sort of person. They will understand me.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that has a link to Aikido too. There's a building up of trust. So when you practice with a complete stranger, you're giving them their body. So if you go in full bore, you're mad. You're either going to completely overwhelm them or probably get crushed. You're better to start slow and build it up and see where that other person is at. And once you've found where they're at, that's when the practice really begins.
Yeah, you're right. It is the word trust. That's right. And you can trust somebody actually quite quickly when you're taking in all this information and picking it up at a deeper level. Absolutely. Yeah, you're quite right. So Aikido is the answer to everything.
Of course it is. That's the only reason I run these sessions. And you've opened up the next part of this beautifully because you've talked about dialogue. So I think we should now open it up to the rest of the people who have come here today. So please unmute if you wish to unmute, offer comments, questions, whatever springs to mind. So who would like to?
Yeah, I'll go.
Go, Piers.
Judy, so you said earlier that people find it difficult to trust their intuition. I can't remember when I haven't, because it just strikes me as it's like having a belief in oneself. But is it that one has a belief in oneself, or why don't people trust their intuition in your experience?
There's a kind of left brain answer. I don't know if you know the Myers-Briggs system. It's a sort of Jungian system of people being different. And, you know, some people actually really trust the ideas that come into their mind, and other people trust facts much more. So I think people are different to start with. Okay, yeah. So some people actually, they build trust on building the blocks. It's a left brain kind of thing to do. They build the blocks of trust. I know this fact about you now, and I know this fact, and I know this fact. Other people are much more likely to trust their first idea about somebody. And I think if you trust your intuition, either you've lived with it for a long time, or it has just worked out well for you. In other words, you've learned to use it well. So it hasn't let you down hugely. I mean, is that true for you? It hasn't really let you down hugely.
That's a very interesting point, because sometimes, yes, obviously you get it wrong sometimes. But I think probably on the balance of probability, it's more often right than not. So yes, I guess, but that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it failing.
Well, we'll leave you to ponder that, Piers, and you can come back. Steve, did you have a question? Steve, do you want to undo your mic? You need to unmute. I would unmute you, but I can't. You have to do it.
You got that little button?
What? No, we can't hear you, Steve. While you look for that, I'm going to open it up to somebody else, and hopefully you'll be able to sort that out shortly. So has anyone else got a question? Finn, you'll need to unmute too. Yeah, good.
No, thank you. That was really stimulating presentation. Thank you. Just wondering if you think there's any particular insight to be gained from thinking about these invisible forces that we sort of describe, and using metaphors like ki, and the way that might relate to the voice and musical relationship, your inner voice, whether that's expression, ki, energy. I just wondered if you've have you a way to conceptualize that, or whether there's much that can be learned or shared?
Energy is a huge subject, isn't it? Because you can think of it in many different ways. You know, I've got, you know, at times I've got very interested in the meridians that run through the body, and you know, there's obviously wonderful good sense on in those. A lot of it, you know, I think energy comes from this relaxation plus energy. I've got a very prosaic example. I can never, ever start our lawnmower. It's one of those you have to go like that. I can't start it. I just can't. And at the end of the summer, I thought to myself, I can do this. You know, I'm the kind of person I could go like that, and I could go through a load of blocks. It would be my key. So I did it. I did it in that way. I pretended I was doing something like Aikido, and I took the breath, and I knew, you know, like you do with extending key and all that. And I started first go, and I thought, isn't that interesting? So it's partly intention, isn't it? It's partly intention, it's partly relaxation, and it's partly energy. I think those three, actually, if we're not thinking of things that are more esoteric, which I also, you know, go with absolutely, but I think when you've got those three together, so you relax, but you're super awake, right? And then you know what your intention is, and you go for that with relaxation and energy. It's amazing what happens. Now, in terms of voice, that is absolutely the same. It's completely the same. So, you know, so many people, they don't take a breath that goes into something. We have expression in our voices when we take a breath and it goes into something. Like if I smell a beautiful smell, the sound is just, it's the sound that came from that particular breath. Whereas no way, oh dear, it didn't work that time, no way came from no, right? So your breath comes from that energy, and people who have a voice that doesn't express, they take a breath and they stop it, they veto it. So, you know, if you say, are you excited? And the person's really excited, you know, they'll say, yes, as a matter of fact, I'm really excited. And they went, stop. And then they speak. And if I can make one sexist comment, men do that far more than women do. It's because we talk a lot when we're very little. That idea of not being laughed at, you know, I'm not going to go, oh, that's not very nice. I go, you know, go away. We stop it. Yep. So voice is only expressive when you've got those three things happening, actually. And it's a long story, and that's I've got to leave it now, haven't I?
It occurs to me,
interesting question, Finn. Actually, I'd love to talk about it more.
You may have noticed that Finn mentioned about music. Well, he is a musician, and it seems to me that really music is just an extension of the voice in many ways. It's, you know, you're using a different instrument, but it really is a voice. So yeah, absolutely, everything that Judy said, I'm sure, is true.
So what's your instrument, Finn?
Quite just piano, guitar, but just thinking more in terms of the voice, it's
okay.
That's personal, but invisible, sort of embodies, it's embodied sound, but it's embodied energy and relation and intention and all these things that you talk about.
Yeah,
but also,
absolutely. And the breath. So the breath before you start has that first phrase in it.
I'm just thinking about teaching. I'm not a trained singer, but in sharing practice at our Aikido club back in the day, there's a lot of metaphor going on, and it seems that that's true in voice teaching as well. That there's a lot of metaphor to try and get an embodied concept.
Hugely. We have a lovely choir teacher, and I've had plenty of, you know, choir directors who will say something like, "Sopranos were a little bit flat. There, could you get it a little bit higher?" Right. Now, that is one way to make the sopranos have nervous breakdowns, because you all go, they go tighter and tighter. But the good one will use a metaphor that say, now this is a joyful piece, you know, let's take a wonderful breath. And in the joy, it goes back in tune. So they constantly use stories to give the body and the mind and everything the right space to create what they want. And you must do that in Aikido all the time. You're always telling stories, aren't you? Both of you. You're always telling stories that are
Sorry, one more random thought, but imagination, we don't talk much about it as well, but to convey that idea and the metaphor, we need to sort of share imagination, and just wondered how that comes into all these things as well.
Imagination. Oh gosh, you're using all these wonderful, wonderful words. I'm not sure whether I'm on the same wavelength as you talking about imagination, but you use it enormously in every type of communication. You're constantly, finding connections, finding things that are going to make it more interesting, finding things that are going to make your point, and so on. I don't know if you mean that or you mean something different, but well, imagination makes the world go round, really. I mean, I think if we could imagine a different world, going to the end of my book, if only more of us could imagine it and not get quite so caught up in every detail that's wrong. If we could imagine how it could work, yeah, God.
Send us in the right direction.
Is your book in audio format?
Who's talking?
It's Steve. He's blind. I should add. So he's in. If you had a Braille version or an audio book, he'd love it.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
If it isn't, then I can convert the print into Braille anyway. So that.
Okay. There is an audible version.
Oh, there is. Okay.
And maybe you're used to these books. I listened to a bit of it and I thought how horrible it was, because they read them like telephone directories sometimes. But there is an audible version, yes.
Oh right, that makes a change anyway.
Judy.
And the other question is about trust. Now, when you can't see, you have to have trust in everything. So you can't go for a day where you haven't, you've got to trust someone. So yeah. I assume that along the sighted road, that's the same type of thing, but it's a different form, takes different form.
Yes, but your intuition is probably sharper than mine with the senses that you use. So I think, yes, trust is partly sight, and obviously, getting around everything in every day, there's a lot in sight. But I think in terms of trusting people as people, everything comes into it.
Yeah.
All your senses come into it really, really strongly. It's funny actually how even without really smelling something, the sense of smell gives you, when they say something smells fishy, you do actually get a sort of smell sometimes that things aren't right. It's kind of, you get it through your nose that something doesn't add up here,
It's the imagination and mindset into that to get that environment.
Yes. Are you telling me? Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And your imagination, but I think all your senses are taking in stuff all the time.
Luke, do you want to unmute?
Sure.
So Luke is my verbal Aikido teacher, and I said he really should come along to this. So I'm interested to know what you've found in tonight's discussion and how it relates to what we do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of the moves that we do is that what we call kino nagare. So it's the sort of letting things happen and drawing it out, and yeah, I think that was a kind of a very pertinent. Yeah, it's very pertinent just to see the sort of the examples that you were giving, Judy, of the situations where you're meeting that person, but you're just receiving and letting them be. And I mean, I gotta say, I loved all Quinton's questions as well. He's really put you on the spot too, with what's authentic for you.
Oh boy, he's good. He's good.
Imagination, all this kind of stuff. Yeah.
I know.
But yeah, very very much so in terms of the the flow of movement and sort of just linking up communication with yeah, with Aikido, of course, I mean, that's what we're kind of doing all the time on the verbal mat, as it were. Yeah, I really appreciated what you've shared tonight. I did actually have a kind of a question on, I was kind of aware of in NLP, they have that move where you say you're going to meet somebody at the energy level that they're at, and then sort of bring it down. I do have some qualms with that. I mean, and now if it is authentic, I think yes. Well, then if you do feel that, and often where there's sort of energy, like if somebody has an angry thing, we might feel that that's unfair. So we will then get into that sort of, oh, this is unfair, and you'll feel that energy. But if we're not on the same level as the other person, I'm just wondering, is there any other ways that you've noticed that can actually embrace that other person's energy if you're not necessarily on their level?
I don't know if this is an answer, but when I was learning NLP, it was all about rapport. So rapport was meeting the person's energy. And we learned how, if somebody crosses their legs, you kind of sort of quietly cross your legs and kind of, you do everything to be like the other person. And everyone started doing this, incredibly well. And it looked really false. I thought, but if you think of it in terms of energy, it can be exceedingly subtle. I mean, subtle makes it sound as a very deliberate thing. It's almost not a deliberate thing. It's I want to meet you where you are. I think it's probably not that I'm noticing it deliberately, but I think it's more a breathing thing than anything else.
So what occurs to me here is that it's about intention. So when we do verbal Aikido, Luke, we go through various strategies about how you might handle a situation. And I've often said, this doesn't feel right in this moment, and that's not what I would say now, and I don't want to do that. At least that's my feeling anyway. And it strikes me the same in that sort of mimicking of posture, that initially it might be a bit artificial, but actually the benefit after time is it does bring you to the same energy point as the other person. So false maybe when you start trying to use that technique, but ultimately it works.
Yes, I think people look out for it though. Then they sort of, if you do gestures, it becomes often too much, I think. It is the meeting of people. It's also how quickly or slowly you come away from it. For example, if somebody, again, it's very sharp, it says, I mean, that's got to happen, hasn't it? It's just got to happen. No, but I'll tell you why. And I go from my no to something I go down hugely fast to whatever is different, but I'm doing it myself. I think there is a sense that people feel met if you've got what their energy is. So if there's some way you have of letting them know that you've got their energy, because if you don't do that, they often don't quite feel understood and keep going at it. But if it were going to be high energy, I would only touch it. I would just touch it a tiny bit, like, no, but I'll tell you what I do think, something like that. So there are all the different permutations of how you might meet somebody. And of course, right brain says there are no rules here. There are no rules. Of course, there are no rules, because you could do something, completely different, but then you'd be aware that then you were doing something completely different, which would have a different effect. I think the whole point of doing things similar is that the person feels understood. They feel you've got what they're about. So if somebody says, oh, well, it's never going to happen for me, you're not going to whine, but you are going to sort of be there with them. Yeah, it's difficult sometimes, isn't it? So you kind of meet them at that.
Yeah.
But no.
I really appreciate what you said. A lot of people don't really get that about when, it's actually sort of antipathic when you say to somebody, well, don't be upset, or don't be afraid. And they're showing fear, or they're showing upset or sad or whatever. And it's a really, it's a, I mean, school teachers talk about it all the time. It's just what they do, but they're not realizing that they're pushing or oppressing or repressing what that person's feeling. So I really loved what you said about that, and I think more people need to know that. So please do continue sharing that. But I do have a question about what you were talking about just there, coming back to that sort of NLP thing, which is, for example, aside from actually going to an NLP training session, which can be kind of expensive sometimes too, but is there a way people can practice? I mean, how would people, for example, that sort of movement that you're talking about, and yeah, I think you're right. It's like any sort of technique. It might feel a bit uncomfortable at first, but once you get into that movement, it can flow a lot more easily, and you'll sort of integrate it better. How can people practice that?
Yeah, you can get loads from a book, and then well, it's trying things out, isn't it? We used to do a thing after we'd learned about rapport. It really worked because I did it myself. I went home on the Underground, and there's a guy sitting opposite me in the double seats, and so I just quietly, he had no idea what I was doing. I don't think the whole way through. I just mirrored how he was. Okay, and he sort of turned the page of his book, and I just sort of moved a little, and so I really mirrored him. For this is pacing in NLP. I paced him, just for my own amusement, because we were completely separate, and he was busy doing his thing. And then at one point, I uncrossed my legs, and he 1 second afterwards uncrossed his legs as well. Sort of. Okay, you could say it was a fluke, but people have tried this many times, and it does happen. Your subconscious kind of picks up that kind of connection. So you can try these things anywhere. If you're chatting with somebody, you need different ways. They suggest in counselling, don't they, that you're sort of at an angle like this with each other, and then you sort of. But you can mirror by doing different things. If someone's super energetic in their language, you need to have some energy about you, say. But it doesn't mean you've got to talk back the same way, but you've got an up energy. But then, when I was talking to my teenage son, when he was a teenager, that would never have worked. If I'd said, so how was school today? Oh, get lost. But with somebody like that, side by side in a car, sound of the car, plenty of mum busy doing stuff, you toss out a little thing, doesn't matter whether they answer or not, because I'm driving and I'm busy. We got really good conversations going like that. Mm. So we were mirroring, but we were mirroring in being completely unconcerned about each other. Mm. All right, with me just tossing out a little question, I obviously wasn't all that concerned. And because I wasn't on his case, he was happy to answer. So there are many different ways of being with people.
You've reminded me of something else, Judy, which is that, when you have an expert in any subject, they're skilled in many, many things, and they've practiced all sorts of exercises over the years to get where they're at, which is just the same in Aikido. We learn all these techniques, but in the moment when somebody really attacks you, you can't be thinking, I'm going to do Ikkyo. You just do whatever comes out, and it's just the same in good communication. You have these techniques you're teaching us all the time, Luke, good techniques, but they don't work unless it's right to use them in that moment. And it's I think in any communication is about having the tools.
Yes, and I was thinking that Luke, really interesting question. It connects to Finn as well. This is all music when it's working. Music isn't always here we flow. Sometimes, yeah. I mean, goodness, if, my doctor used to be so good at not matching. I'd have about 30 seconds in his surgery, and then suddenly he'd be on his feet. And because he was on his feet, I sort of got to my feet. And before I blinked, I was outside the door again. Well, he was doing this mismatching, which kind of, without saying, well, that's enough now, gives a person, the sign, I'm not with you in this place anymore, I'm somewhere else. So it's all music communication, isn't it? And there are many different ways. You can mismatch, you can flow, you can, it's all there. But then that's the same with, what is it, sixth form, where you suddenly go at people in Aikido. I can't remember now. You stand up against somebody and.
Oh no, it's not. Okay, so any final questions or comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go
Sorry,
on, Deborah.
it's Deborah. Because what struck me with Judy, with your presentation, was a lot of the things that you're saying about good communication, about meeting the other person, and about the care and the love, and a lot of the different things you were saying actually come quite naturally to me when I'm in a good place, mentally and emotionally and so on. And then there are other times, and for me, I'm thinking less of like days than like periods of months when I've not, and this is not the case at the moment, but looking back, when I've not been in a good place mentally and emotionally, and I withdraw into myself, and it's almost like I can't open my mouth. And so the question is more like, I think some of the things you're talking about, the sort of like skills or techniques or things, the things that actually do come quite naturally to me when I'm well, I would be very interested to hear what you think about how to do those things and how to almost like push yourself into doing those things from a state when you're not so well. And I guess that, I mean, I can't believe that, you know, this is just an issue for me. I mean, it must apply to some other people as well. So I thought I'd ask.
Well, it applies to me, so that's fine. I'm sure it applies to lots of us. I think there are a million different ways. I think there are a million different answers to it. One I would give is that if you're particularly good at empathy, you're also vulnerable to being, you know, easily put down by things that are happening because you sense the feedback you get from other people can often hurt you or, you know, affect you in different ways. And something that I've certainly worked on through the years is knowing how important me being me is as well. So I'm not exactly answering a question, but that is part of it. I think it's a sort of long-term thing to know my boundaries, my no's as well as my yeses, so that I feel a certain amount of strength in myself. Now, if you're a very good communicator, you're often very much on the other person's case because you're very aware of, you know, what's going to make it work between you and the harmonious interchanges, and, you know, it's working really well. But there is also this other side of it, which is I need to know what's me as well. I think it happens for many people who bring up a family, for example, that they're constantly working to make things work, to make the whole thing work. And they wake up one day when they're 50 and they think, I haven't the least idea what I like and what I don't like. I don't know anything about myself whatsoever because I don't seem to ever assert myself to be in a particular way. And I think if you've got that as a sort of a core inside you, it's sometimes then easier. Although it's also a toss-up, isn't it? Sometimes actually you really need to nurture yourself and go into what's happening for me, and other times actually push yourself a little to go out. And also if your communication with other people is always you being the sunny side of you, and that's what you do well, you don't do well the sharing the non-sunny side of yourself. That probably means there's work to do on ourselves, you know, and sort of exploring our shadow side as well. Oh dear, that was about 10 quarter answers.
Well, you brought me to my last.
It was a lovely big question. I kind of, yeah.
You brought me to my last resonance with Aikido, which was it's really all about balance at the end of the day, knowing when you need to look after yourself, knowing when to look after the other, and when actually it's appropriate to be thinking about the us. And you know, everyone has it. Every part of that has its place, really, and being intuitive about which needs the most attention is, I think, the answer. So Judy, for me, it's been a fantastic session. I've really enjoyed it. There's just so much resonance there for me. Thank you very, very, very much indeed. To everybody else, in the beginning of this, the chat, I posted about an Aikido event, the Passion in Action seminars this weekend. So if you're passionate about taking Aikido into other realms, this is the event for you. Finding out what people are passionate about in their Aikido and where they want to take it. Free seminar, the links are in the chat. Next week, we've got Richard Strozzi Heckler coming, another sort of star on the American scene. He has a huge business in taking business consultancy, basically Aikido and business consultancy, if you like. A lovely man. You're really going to enjoy what he offers. And lastly, just want to thank you all yet again for showing up, and I hope it's been as useful for you as has been for me.
Thanks very much, Judy and Quentin. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Judy.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
I think it works,
Thank you very
Judy.
much. Yeah, it's a little